Party with your host, Dustin Rybka.
Hello and welcome to Sex Party. I'm your host, Dustin Rybka. This week's episode is a doozy, people. They're all doozies, but this week is a good one. Really good one. Some fucking heavy firepower. Good stuff. Carla Romo is my guest. She is a dating and relationships coach. She is the author of an amazing book. She's the co-host of the Love Fix podcast. We talk about codependency. We talk about trauma. We talk about relationships. We talk about what it was really like writing her book, what got her really moving on it. So if you're someone who's creative, working on things, writing, whatever it may be, this is some serious value for you here. We talk about dictionaries. You're going to learn a very alarming statistic about psychopaths that you can take with you to parties and text to all your friends. And towards the end of the episode, we get into a little bit of my bullshit being an avoidant attachment nut job. So strap in, put your thinking cap on, and enjoy my conversation with Carla Romo.
This week's conversation.
Carla Romo, welcome to Sex Party. How are you?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm okay.
Oh, just okay. You know, I always am curious as a coach. I always ask when somebody says, I'm just okay. Why is it just okay?
Well, I feel like that is such a, how are you doing is such a giant question.
Yeah.
And I want to give a really amazing, thoughtful answer, but I don't have one. So I'm just okay.
So it's just okay. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, everything is on fire, right? But hopefully someone will put it out. It's not going to be me, but
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I get that. Totally.
100%. Okay. So for the audience who might not know you, can you talk a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes, I am a certified dating and relationship coach. That is a thing. People are always like, how do you get into something like that? And I always say you go through your own experiences. I had my own self-love, self-growth journey where I was in codependent cycles of relationships, toxic relationships. And then I really, as I said, I found myself, which is the most important relationship you're ever going to have is the relationship with yourself. And from there, I started to build my little coaching empire. So I'm a podcast host of the Love Fix podcast. I've got a book called Contagious Love, Break Free from Codependency for Damn Good. And I do keynote talks.
Yeah. You just did a big one in Canada, right?
I did, yes.
How'd that go?
It was great. Dude, Canadians, I'm sure you get Canadians listening to this podcast.
Yes.
I swear they are okay, so I'm American, right? And they are the nicest people. And when I was there, I was like, I just I wish Americans were this nice. Like I was sprinting through the Montreal airport, okay, because my flight was delayed and I only had 30 minutes to make my connection flight from America to Canada. So I had to go through immigration, all that kind of stuff. And I'm sprinting and sweating. And I get to the customs line and the Canadians are like, oh, it looks like you're in a rush. Go ahead, go in front of me. I'm like, Americans don't do that. You have to plead with Americans to cut the line.
Right. They're offering you bagels and shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a guest from Canada on, and we were talking about the difference between even their sex work laws are way nicer than American sex work laws. So,
dude, yes, yeah, America is
upset.
There's a lot of great things about our country. I will say that.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of fucked up things too. So
totally. Okay. So do you want to talk a little bit about your book? Because I feel like that's a great place to start.
Yeah, totally. So I always knew that there was going to be something within what I was going through in regards to toxic relationships and codependency, even starting in my childhood, because that's really where my codependency begun. And I always knew that there was it was serving some kind of purpose. And it wasn't until I went through my own experience of my self-love journey that I was like, oh shit, other people might be able to benefit from what I had to go through because they're going through it too. And it shouldn't be a shameful experience. So, what I did is I took my own story, starting with my childhood. So, as I always say, that, my father was abusive. So, I grew up with domestic violence, even though, I'm estranged from him and he wasn't a big part of my life. At the same time, from a very young age, I experienced that, witnessed that, right? And that's actually how a lot of my trauma developed. And so I always had this need, this underlying need to feel loved and validated by a romantic partner. So even from fifth grade, I was always wanting a boyfriend just to have that validation. We're talking young, it started. That I didn't really know the difference. I didn't realize what healthy relationships were. I thought if I could find somebody who was fucked up, then I could save them, fix them, and that would deem me as being worthy, lovable, likable, and worth being in a relationship for. So, as you can imagine, that sets one up for a toxic relationship. And I take full responsibility in being part of that toxic relationship because that was my part. But I found myself in this pattern over and over and over again. And I talk a lot about that in the book. And my breaking point, which was a trip to Ireland, solo trip. Shout out to anybody. Have you ever taken a solo trip?
I've taken many solo trips, never to Ireland.
Okay, but I like that you've taken solo trips. I
Yeah.
always suggest to people to take your solo trip. So I took this solo trip to Ireland and I was standing in the Wicklow Forest and I just had this spiritual moment with myself where I was like, okay, I have two paths in front of me. Either one, choose this path of toxic relationships, keep doing the same thing. It's self-sabotage at this point because I'm aware of what's happening. Or it's choose the path of creating that relationship with myself, learning how to love myself, learning what red flags are, what I actually want for me and need for me so that I can ask for that of a partner. And so I ended that relationship. And as I like to say, I begun the most important relationship, which is the relationship with myself. So the book covers a lot of that transformation. And then I intertwine it with client stories because I've been working with lots of clients who have been in toxic relationships or breaking free of toxic relationships or codependency. And they want to be able to cultivate healthy relationships. And so there's some steps in there to be able to do that work and some client stories that hopefully are relatable, not just my story. But yeah, so that's really the book's inspiration and what came of it.
So did you went on this self-discovery journey,
Yep.
the hero's journey, right? And you go to Ireland, you're doing all the cool shit,
Yeah.
solo tripping it up. And then you come back and you're like, I'm gonna write this book. Or
No, I appreciate you acknowledging what was the gap period
Sure.
because okay, so at the time I was working in television. So I was casting TV shows, I was working in Los Angeles. I was doing casting, producing, I was creating a documentary. I was working this whole other career. And it was a very successful career. I enjoyed it at the time, but what was happening is I was burning out. So it was just like my relationships. I needed the approval of work in order to feel like I was enough, right? And if you know anything, if anybody's listening or wants to learn anything about Hollywood, in order to get your next job, you have to be a people pleaser. You have to be good enough to have worked. Somebody has to like you enough to pick you for the next job. There's no HR, there's no contracts, it's freelance, and you could be fired tomorrow. So I was working this career where I was caught up in the hamster wheel of trying to prove myself through my career. Codependency robbed me not just from relationships, but it robbed me from my career as well. And I sat in my career for years knowing that I wanted to do coaching, I wanted to write a book, I wanted to do talks. And so I just sat there for a while until one day I just had this really powerful moment where I was another spiritual moment, right? Where I was sitting in my living room floor in West Hollywood. And as I always like to describe this moment, okay, so I did not have AC, and
Mhm.
it was a summer of the worst heat wave. And basically, I had just gotten off this show with this celebrity chef. It was the first season show, so everybody's working around the clock, and I'm sitting in my living room. The fan's blowing on me, but it's like that hot air. It's not
Yeah.
actually cooling you off. And I just thought to myself, okay, if this is going to sound dramatic, just bear with me. If I were to die tomorrow, would I actually be happy doing what I was doing? And the answer was no. And so I was like, well, fuck it. If not now, then when? And why are you living a life that you're not truly living fully? And so from there, I Carla Romo'd it, which I get shit done. So I signed up for coaching, certification, and then manifested, wrote out that I was going to write this book, and honestly, from there, just like made the blueprint for my business today.
Yeah, no, that's fucking amazing, and I love every bit about that story. There's so many points at which I want to dive in and grab more. One, um, so we could define what codependency is. We could open a dictionary. Do people still do that? We could Google it, right? Um, but what I'd rather do, right? I'm sorry, I was born in the '80s.
Yeah, no, yeah.
What I'd rather do is, what is your personal, intimate definition of codependency?
I love that you just asked me that, because there is no actual definition for codependency. So there's like similar ones, and people put in books and things like that. The easiest way to break it down is you lose a part of yourself, or you lose your whole self to somebody in a relationship. So you neglect your own needs because you're so worried about somebody else's needs either being met, taking care of them. So that's it. That's really the basis of it, is you lose a part of yourself, or you lose yourself to somebody else in a relationship.
Okay. And does that always come from previous trauma, childhood trauma? Like, where does that codependent, um, seed get planted, really?
Yeah. So it's really interesting because technically, yes. Like, if you were to look at somebody's childhood and see that, okay, like you had dysfunction growing up in your household of some sort, your needs weren't met as a kid, whether emotionally, physically, whatever it might be, there was alcoholism or some kind of addiction, then yes, right? Like, that would be the source was from childhood. But there have been studies out there where they have found that people can still be codependent without having the trauma in their childhood. So it could be getting into a relationship with somebody who has an addiction and then losing yourself to that person, but you didn't have anything from childhood.
Yeah, I mean, because it comes up a lot on this show, but also in other places too. Like, it always goes back to childhood, right? And I always wonder, well, it can't always be childhood. There's somebody out there who had the perfect fucking childhood who's a psychopath. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, totally.
yeah, so that's a very amazing, answer. So you suffered this, abuse, from your father, right? And I've had, an abusive stepfather and all of the things too. Sorry to hear that. But from there, did you then, as an adult, you started having relationships that were like just less than great, like one after the
Um,
other?
Dysfunctional. I think less than
Yeah.
great is too kind of a word. Yeah. Well, here's the thing is that I always want to put the focus back on myself when we're talking about codependency, because it's
Yeah.
so easy to, this is what codependents do. You point your finger at somebody else, say, you're the one that's messing up. If only you did this, if only you did that, then everything would be okay. But the codependent plays a really big role in this toxic cycle. And that's waiting around the fantasy of hoping this person will change. Picking a partner, for me, for example, and the reason I bring this back to like the dysfunction is because I was coming in a dysfunctional way. So I found somebody who was emotionally, multiple people, but who were emotionally unavailable, whether that was an addiction or their compulsive behaviors that maybe they didn't classify as an addiction, but maybe could be, things like that, where that was just what I was seeking. And so as the codependent, the perfectionist in me, I needed to make it work. And that's where that cycle really started. Whereas somebody who's secure, emotionally available, is not codependent, would see these issues, maybe try to work it out a little bit, but recognize, okay, this isn't really healthy. I don't want to involve myself in it.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, you were able to, it sounds like when you probably around that self-discovery time, be like, okay, there's a pattern here. Right. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that sort of realization, like, oh shit, like I keep picking the same psychopath, and dudes who are doing drugs or on motorcycles or cheating or whatever the fuck. Motorcycles, who am I today? Like some 1950s
dictionaries, motorcycle folks.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So, my whole thing is that like, it was whatever was going on with me, whatever I wasn't comfortable with my own self and my own skin. It was great to have somebody on a motorcycle
With a dictionary.
with a dictionary as a distraction. And so I think that a lot of times if anybody's listening who's like, oh shit, this is me, right? You're not screwed. There's a way out. But you have to get real with yourself. And I always say that it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Nobody's journey is linear. Anybody who's going to tell you that they went from point A to point B with no problems, no issues, let's go back to what you said earlier, is probably a psychopath.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I had different moments. Like, for example, I had gone to therapy for a little bit, and not a little bit, for years. Okay. But my therapist was the one that was like, you're codependent. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. I had no idea, no awareness to it. So it wasn't until I really took that step back and was like, okay, I need to look at myself. I need to look at what I'm doing. What does this mean? That then I was able to say, oh man, this is happening. And then I could like see it happening in front of me. Like I could pick a partner and be like, oh yeah, this probably is codependent. This doesn't seem very healthy. But I was still in my growth journey of denial and kind of learning and not ready to let go. And then the Ireland story was it. That was my like, you either you go down this path or you don't. And that's that.
Yeah, no, and that's awesome too, because what a way to like usher in change is to go on some amazing trip and like figure it out, you know?
Yes.
Okay, and so where did the idea to write the book come from? Was it something you needed to do to like make yourself like sort of forget the past and lay all that to rest, right? And move on from it? Was it to help other people? Was it a combo deal? Did you like meet someone in Hollywood who's like, hey, we could option this for a Netflix, you know?
Yeah, this was all self-started, so nobody in Hollywood. But I just honestly, it was part of my healing journey. Being able to share my story and help others is part of my path of healing. And so if I can help people through and give them some kind of solution or tools, things like that to work through this issue, then I was doing my part in healing and helping others. So that's really where that came from for me, is that, okay, I went through this stuff for some kind of crazy reason. We don't know why, don't need to figure it out. But
Sure.
now what do I do with it? Now, how do I help people who are also struggling and going through their codependency journey, or they're breaking free of toxic relationships?
Right. Okay. And now we come to a place that's interesting because all of us, myself included, have been like, I'm going to write a book someday, you know, or right?
Yeah.
I could write a book about what happened last night, you know, or what's been
Totally.
happening the last 40 nights every day, whatever. So when you decide you're going to write this book, how many times did you fold the laptop up and throw it against the wall? Like, how long did it take you? How much energy? Like, let's get real about it. Cause I think
Yeah.
you have a really unique story. I think you have a really awesome way you go about things. And I think other people out there could be inspired by that. But let's inject some realism into it.
Okay. So kind of like I said earlier, it's like my family and friends will call it like Carla Romo style. Like when I decide something, that's it. Like I have decided it. And so I had played with the idea. I didn't decide, played with the idea for a little bit, some time to write a book. And like I had wrote in a journal entry, like, oh, really want to write a book when I was talking to myself in my journal entry around, which is a great tool for anybody who wants to let things, steam off. But I had wrote, part of being a coach and doing this career change is to help people. And I really want to write this book and do talks and all the good stuff. And so from that point on, I knew that I wanted to do this. But once I made the decision, it was January. It was a January that I decided, okay, I'm going to write a book. So then I tried to do it on my own and see like, okay, like how far can I get? And then I got to April. And in April, I thought, fuck this. Like this is not going anywhere. Like I cannot do this on my own. I have to hire like an editor, somebody who can help me with the book. So I found this woman who literally did self-help books around different addictions and codependency for a publishing house that she had worked for years. And I was like, holy shit, this couldn't be more perfect. And she had broken away and she does her own stuff now on her own. And so I hired her on. And what we did is we outlined the book from chapter to chapter, exactly what would be talked about. And then once that was done, I did not stop writing for 5 months. It took me only 5 months, which is very short, but that is because I had all the outlines, everything, had done that footwork, and then just literally did not stop. I wrote this book all over the world on airplane floors, or not airplane floors. I was sitting in an airplane, but airport floors to literally like I was in the middle of a move out of LA and like I wrote it in different states. Like I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And then I worked with my editor who was able to keep up with me, which was awesome. And we got the book done and out. And that's really, I wrote it really quickly.
See, this is amazing that I asked that question. Way to go, me. Because look at the idea that you knew like, fuck, instead of like giving up, which is what most of us would do, or giving up for a little while, right?
Totally.
At least you found someone who is knowledgeable to get you organized on the project. And then as soon as you're like, oh, there's a path, boom, right?
Yes.
Fucking super valuable to anyone listening that wants to do anything creative, but especially write a fucking book or even a screenplay or anything like that.
Totally.
And I love that because, once you have an idea, it's like, at least for me, and I don't know if you feel this way, like with this podcast that I started, it's been, before this, it was a whole year of like, I'm going to start this podcast. What's it going to be about? I found the sex and relationships thing, right? And I'm like, oh, cool, right? And then it wasn't something that I was in control of anymore. It was like a demon that I had birthed into the ether that would sit on my chest and be like, come on, come on, come on. And it's like, at certain points, you're like, leave me the fuck alone, right? You're walking around like, never going to do this podcast, like whatever.
Totally. Yeah.
And so it's the most maddening thing in the world. Then you do it and it goes away. It comes back and it's like, you need to get on recording more episodes or what.
You push past it at some point. You're like, I got you. This old story.
But what you said is to take that sort of like manic kind of crazy energy and get organized with it.
Yeah. And ask for help. Fuck. Like we cannot do things on our own. We're only so capable. Like if anybody listens to the Love Fix podcast, they know I talk about Taylor Swift. I love Taylor Swift. Total girl crush on her. I don't know how you feel about her, but I think she's fucking amazing.
Who doesn't love Taylor Swift?
Okay, good. Woo! I was like, are we about to get controversial on here? So, you look at her, but she works with producers to help her make the music. Like she writes her own stuff, but she has a team of people. She has a whole, marketing team. She's got managers. She's got assistants. Like success is in numbers. And I think that people don't recognize that enough. We get so in our own heads, as I call our BS, our blind sides, that, oh, like I'm not going to be good enough, or I have to prove to myself that I can do this on my own. And that's just bullshit. Like at the end of the day, when you ask for help, you can go so much further.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's like a huge piece of this episode, I think, is like laid out right there in the value department, because anybody listening that wants to do anything creative, right? That's a huge piece from someone who has done something creative and been successful. I mean, you come up with ideas and they're like ghosts or demons. Like I said before, like every time you open the shower, they're standing there. Every time you go in the refrigerator, they're in there. It's like, fuck, man. At one point, I'm going to write this screenplay or whatever. We're all carrying around something, but I think the idea that you don't suck, you just need some guidance. And there are people who are qualified to give you that guidance, whether it's editor or, I mean, especially with all of the online stuff that you can find people out there. Everyone's connected, whatever.
Totally.
Which leads us amazingly well, and you mentioned it, into your podcast. So let's talk about your podcast. So you have the book. Was the podcast before? Was it after the book came out? When did you start the podcast?
The podcast was after the book. So
Okay.
it's a really funny story. So my co-host is Sherry Gaba, and she and I are about 30 years apart. Okay, she's older. And so I was like trying to help people, give people some math here, okay?
Right.
And so she's like an OG. She was on Celebrity Rehab as like the therapist. I mean, she's done a lot of work. She's really well known in the codependent, toxic relationship, narcissistic abuse space. And so I reached out to network with her because I believe in working in numbers. I think that's really a way to become successful. And I reached out to her just to network. And she said to me, I've been thinking about doing a podcast. To be honest, I had played with the idea. I wasn't really sold on a pod. That wasn't like my, I gotta do this. And so I said, let me think about it. So we met, we talked about it. And when I say we met, we've never actually met in person. We've only met virtually.
Nice.
We live across the country from each other. And she just said, I have this idea. It's codependency, toxic relationships, and dating. And I said, yeah, let's do it. And so it's been so fun. It's awesome, like working with her and being able to interview some amazing guests. I mean, we've interviewed some leading researchers in terms of one of my favorite episodes is on psychopaths. And this woman is literally leading research in the world on psychopaths right now and why we attract psychopaths and what those flags are. And is it really childhood trauma? Is it not? So anyways, we have people all over the world come on our podcast who are experts in their field, and they're quick episodes, but it's just a quick little fresh up of, okay, how do I get out of this toxic relationship? What are healthy relationships? If I'm in a relationship, is it toxic or is it healthy? And it's an awesome community we've created as well of all of our listeners.
Yeah, very cool. For one moment, let's jump back to the psychopaths. Because
I love talking about them. Fascinating.
Right. I've been called a psychopath at some point in my life. More than twice. So okay, what are some interesting facts you found out about psychopaths that you would love to share?
1 in 100 are psychopaths.
Mm-hmm.
That's fucking terrifying, man.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God. Okay.
I mean, someone at the grocery store is a psychopath.
100% is a psychopath. Yes.
Yeah.
Another thing about psychopaths that I found very interesting. So a lot of times they want to say that people are sociopaths and then you have psychopaths. Wrong. They actually all fall under the exact same category, which is psychopath. So anybody with a personality disorder, like narcissistic personality disorder, those are psychopaths. So it's really easy to be like, oh, they're like a narcissist. They don't have remorse. No, they don't have remorse because they're a psychopath. They just are the subdivision of psychopath, which is narcissistic personality disorder. So I found that very fascinating. Another thing that I found extremely fascinating. So if you identify as codependent, now this kind of like shook up my world a little bit, shook up my book even a little bit. I will admit that, but I believe in research, so I follow the research. But they were saying that people who are codependent, they used to just say like, oh, it could be anybody, like whatever type of thing. what they found is that people who did not grow up with trauma, it's a personality type that psychopaths attract. So they did this study. I really hope I'm saying the study right. Okay, they did this. Don't quote me, but this is what our guests shared. They did this study where it was an empathy test. So you have one end, which is extreme empathy, the other end, which is no empathy. Okay, so on the no end empathy, you're looking at a psychopath, right? The psychopath attracted somebody, if you took the very middle of that scale and ticked it 1 point to the right, which was empathy, that was who was attracting the psychopaths. So it wasn't somebody who has tons of empathy and like, no, it was literally somebody who ticked 1 point over on the empathy scale.
Oh,
That's
wow.
scary. So it's a
That's really
personality
scary.
type that actually attracts psychopaths that they're finding. And then of course you have the codependency in there as well, but
Oh man, that's a doozy. Yeah, for sure. Well,
right?
and
You're like,
I'm like thinking back to previous relationships, like, well, I mean, and that stuff gets so overused, right? Like sociopath, psychopath. I
yes.
mean, it gets
Yes.
really, really tossed around more than NFT or Bitcoin or whatever. It's like Jesus. All right, everyone's a
Everyone's a
sociopath, and
narcissist. Yeah, I can't
yeah,
stand that. There's so many people. Oh, the Bob is a narcissist. Are they really? Like, yeah.
yeah. I mean, and it's a sliding scale, like you just said, right?
Yep.
um, which is crazy because 1 in 100. Fuck. I mean, if that's the real stats, that's. I mean, someone in the movie theater, someone in this apartment building,
Everywhere you
psycho.
go is a psychopath.
Yeah.
I have
Right.
tons living on my street. There's thousands of people that live on my street. And I'm like,
Right.
okay. Yeah.
Psychos everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay. So moving from that, lovely transition. So you've got the book, you've got the podcast, which is fascinating, and everyone should go. We'll make sure we link everything.
Oh, thank you.
Of course. But then you also do coaching. So is it like more one-on-one? Is it group? Is it both?
Okay, so I do majority is one-on-one coaching. So I do dating and relationship coaching. That's definitely my specialty. I also do life coaching as well. So a lot of my clients come to me like they're like, "Oh, I need help with my dating life." And then they're like, "My career too." So I do it all. My focus is though my specialty is dating and relationships. And then I do group coaching. So the Love Fix podcast had a group coaching course. We're actually going to come out with one in a couple months. I just dropped that. I hope Sherry doesn't mind. Spoiler alert.
Blame it on me.
Yeah, there you go. So I do group coaching here and there, but typically it's a lot of one-on-one coaching.
Well, that's awesome because I feel like so. Can you talk about what made you want? Was it just like that was the natural progression of your interest and your passion, or was it like, I got this book and it's really good, and I might be a psycho and or whatever? Or like, what was it that made you like, okay, I should add this insanity to my life, right? Because
Of
it's
the
a
coaching.
hardcore, yeah, it's a
Oh,
hardcore thing to.
I started as a coach.
Okay,
And then the book came. So I started as a coach. I started doing keynotes. Then the book came. Then the podcast came.
okay.
So my coaching was I love people. Oh my God. This is actually a joke I make, and anybody who's listening to the podcast hopefully will get it. I literally tick almost 100% on the oh my God, why can't I think of the word? What is the word when you're really outgoing and you love to people, you get energy off of them? Extrovert. There you go. I tick like almost 100% on extrovert, but I like to make the distinction that I don't tick 100% because psychopaths tick 100%. So just saying, I don't think I'm a psychopath. But yeah, I love people. Like I love people. I love helping people. I love learning about people. So I made documentaries when I was living in LA, and I loved following people's stories and letting them get to feel like they were able to tell their story in a way and express themselves. And I just love that about coaching. I mean, there's nothing more gratifying than helping somebody go from their point A to point B and coming out in a totally different way than they could have ever expected that is helpful and useful in their life. So I know I'm like geeking out right now, but that is like
No,
what
geek out.
I love it. Like it's the best.
Yeah, we're big fans of geeking out. So geek the fuck
Perfect.
out. Yeah.
Perfect.
And I think we should go back a second and just put a disclaimer, right? Just because you may fall into the psychopath box doesn't, we're not talking about like a murder, like that doesn't mean everyone's murdering
No,
everyone,
not at
right? There's
all.
yeah.
100%. Also, gosh, I'm gonna get like a DM and somebody's like, "I'm coming after you."
Right. You found my
Okay, yeah, like
secret.
you could be a psychopath. There's actually this guy on TikTok. I really want to get him for my podcast, but I mean, definitely you should get him for your podcast. I see you taking notes. It's okay. We've got to help each other out in numbers, like I said. But there's this guy on TikTok who's a narcissist and he's a recovering narcissist and he talks about his narcissistic personality disorder. And it's fascinating. And so he is somebody that is able to have the recovery. We also interviewed a narcissist on our episode. It was a couple and it was all about attachment styles. But he also said that he's actually a recovering narcissist. So there are people out there, and I always actually disclaimer this. I do not want to give people hope who are in relationships with narcissists who do not see their part. That's not a reason to hang on because Carla's saying that there's people out in recovery from narcissism. But anyways, I just wanted to share that like just because somebody's a narcissist in recovery, just want to put in recovery, or a psychopath or whatever, they're not going to go murder people. That's a misconception.
Yeah.
And also we interviewed another woman who works with narcissists. And like a lot of the reasons that they have narcissism and things like that and are psychopaths is because of trauma. And so they're actually having a trauma response. It's just a really unfortunate one toward other people.
Yeah, because I just pictured everyone out there listening like they're thinking it's like a Norman Bates situation, right? Like someone's dressing up like their mom and like murder,
Yeah.
in the shower. So I just wanted to put that out there that you can be a high functioning, charismatic. No, I'm not campaigning for myself here, but you can be a high functioning person, a member of society, and still be a fucking psychopath.
Yes.
So
And
there's that.
actually, okay, sorry, just one more thing on
No,
psychopaths
go
because this is
ahead.
just
Yeah, I
too
love it.
fun. A
Yeah,
lot
way
of
too
times
fun.
you'll have no idea that someone's a psychopath because the way that they fit into society is they mimic other people's behaviors to be able to fit in because they don't know how to feel. So anybody can fall into being in a relationship, friends with, coworkers with, whatever, with a psychopath. So
Yeah, and I feel like more often than not, from my limited understanding of sociopaths, psychopaths, is a good number at least are extremely intelligent. So
yeah.
it's not like a bunch of
Yeah.
idiots walking around with shovels or whatever the fuck we're thinking about.
Which
So
actually, to be honest, I'd rather have them walking around with shovels and not be smart because they're
yeah,
outsmarting people. But yeah.
just walk out into traffic, right? Like fucking lemmings or something. Um, dig a hole over here, Randy. Yeah. So okay. So moving from the psychopath, they'll probably come back. I have a feeling that this episode will be
I
titled
know it's kind of
something
fun.
along the line. Yeah,
Psychopath.
it's
Carla
amazing.
Romo dash psychopath, and then that's
Right?
people just who is this person? Please don't
Okay,
do that.
so no promises, but no. Okay, so you have the podcast, you've written the book, you're a coach. What are you noticing now, right? Is there trends in relationships currently? I know obviously, and I won't say we're out of the pandemic, but we're sort of pretending or hoping that we're in a post pandemic world, which please, dear God, whatever, right? So are you noticing certain things that are different than they were maybe say 2019 in dating and relationships?
Okay, so the pandemic has really taken its roller coaster. So I'm gonna take you through pre to during to post. We're gonna just say it's post. I know it's not
Yeah.
over. One of my best friends was supposed to come visit me this weekend from LA, and she's got COVID. So we know that COVID is running strong right now.
Right.
I'm not in denial of that. But in terms of dating, so I will say that I feel like things got so fast, like there was just so quick in terms of dating. Like It was trying to keep up with the apps, meeting people, like just going on so many dates. There wasn't really this like slow down pause. The pandemic actually, I think, okay, I have to say this very carefully. And I want to preface this as I'm not saying the pandemic was good for people in the sense that a lot of mental health issues rose, people lost loved ones. Like, okay, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm
Of
saying
course.
is, though, out of really shitty experiences and situations, okay, we're talking resilience here, you can grow and learn wisdom. And I think that that was actually really helpful for people in relationships and people who were dating because it made you slow the fuck down. It made you get to know yourself, sit with your thoughts, really like decide. Like I realized that a lot of my clients who are my clients today had moments during the pandemic of holy crap, I have been so focused on my work that I haven't paid any attention to finding a partner, and that's what makes me happy in life. My work is not going to bring me all the happiness or that relationship both ways of a relationship starting and feeling like wow, like we can get to know each other in such a different way than we would have been able to before the pandemic, to also the other side of wow, I realize I really am not right in this relationship is not right, and I would not have noticed that if I didn't slow down. So I think that the pandemic brought on some really positive things, and I also look at the pandemic as a collective trauma, which it is. So
Mhm.
maybe somebody listening is like, well, it wasn't traumatic for me. That's fine. We're talking about as a collective, so not an individual
You're a
standpoint, right? But
psycho.
who's
Right.
psychopath? But as a collective, it's a trauma, right? And so everybody experienced their own trauma response, right? And so I see now post pandemic, right, that people are wanting to get out there, but I think that people who had an opportunity to grow and learn during this time actually are coming out with a lot more wisdom of what they want, what they're looking for, just more of like having a knowledge base. Now, this is not everybody's experience. This is who I'm working with, and who I work with are people who want to be in relationships, who want their relationship to last, right? Who want to do the work to get there. But this is the change that I'm kind of seeing here.
Yeah. I mean that lines up because I think there was this expectation.
COVID.
Jesus, I'm being poisoned. I don't know what's going on. There was this expectation, I think, that when they sounded the fucking air horn and were like all clear, like everyone was just gonna have like blowout like sex festival, whatever. And to a degree, I mean, I have been like going back out to like bars and like whatever
Yeah.
slowly, because dear God, I need it. Right. But
Yes.
it
Yeah.
is kind of like fucking horny town out there a little bit.
Oh,
But
100%. Yes.
that being said, we can totally dive into that too. But like that being said, the dating apps have gotten less horny town and more like tightened up. Like if you don't check these boxes, at least these first three, you're out of here.
Yes.
And so I've definitely seen that switch over. So you're totally right on the money bullseye,
Yeah. Yeah, because people know what they want. Back to horny town, though, I have to say that I feel
Yes.
like, well, it's normal to have sex, right? Like, it's like humans need to have sex. And so I think it's kind of hilarious because it's like in the very beginning of the pandemic, like everybody's locked indoors, you can't get out type of thing. Now they're saying that like I just read somewhere, I don't remember the article, but it was like STDs are crazily on the rise right now. Like yeah, because everybody wanted like who wasn't having sex, who was trapped in their house is like out and about. So I just thought it was
Yeah,
funny.
but like, come on, guys, like, wear a condom, maybe? I mean,
This is
nothing
true.
is,
This is
you,
to wrap it up. Like, come on. Yeah,
right. We all got
totally.
like a baby degree in virology, like, what, and you're wondering why you have herpes now? What's going on, man? Like,
Totally. Yes.
Jesus Christ. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can go to Horny Town like all day and night. Just be fucking safe, right? Like, come
Totally.
on.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed.
And I think that's really interesting because there was like an insane panic, right? We saw like OnlyFans subscriptions like blast off through the
Right.
roof.
Imagine like Pornhub. Like how like
Yeah.
I'd be so fascinated because like porn is one of the most like what is it like leading like monetarily leading industries in the US. And so
Mhm.
I'd be so curious to see like where porn sales went during the pandemic. That would be fascinating.
Yeah, and they what's crazy is there was like this huge Pornhub crackdown where like MasterCard pulled it, so you couldn't use MasterCard or whatever because they thought like, well, there was this sort of like dust up over videos that were posted that they weren't sure if there was consent and there was like maybe someone's underage,
Oh,
so they like used that.
gross.
It was like timed right when the traffic was really going up, and they boom. So people were jumping like from Pornhub because they couldn't use their credit card to other sites. So it was the mess you're talking about, the traffic spiking is like crazy all over the place from my
Oh,
understanding. Yeah.
that's freaking hilarious. There should just be a whole podcast episode that you dedicate to exploring that.
Yeah, there's some stuff I'm working on, I think, coming up now that we can sort of tell the story like from a standpoint that
Yes.
it's been a while. I think
Totally.
there's some really cool shit
No,
coming up for
totally.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have Horny Town, we have the conservative dating, not conservative, but they've gotten a little more conservative,
Just people who
right?
know what they want. I wouldn't even call it
Yeah,
conservative. It's just people feeling confident of like, yeah, this is what I want and I'm not going to settle for less.
right. And both things are fine. You know, you can do both. You can
Yes, of
either whatever
course.
you want,
Yeah.
right?
I will
Um,
say,
yeah.
I just want to throw this in there. I will say this, and I
Yeah.
tell this to all my clients. So, I'm sex positive. Like, don't give a shit. Like, if you want to have sex with somebody on a first date, go for it. If you want to have a one night stand, go for it. But I do tell my clients this, the clients who get attached, and this is for men and women. Okay. A lot of women always get the rap for, oh, women have sex and they get attached so quickly. Men do too. Especially if they have certain attachment styles, which are anxious, secure, avoidant. Like, depending on your attachment style, you can get even more attached. Anyways, okay. I always tell clients that if you know you have a pattern, if you're somebody who has a pattern of going after red flags, turning them green, being in denial about people, sketchy behavior, that kind of thing, then hold off a little bit of having sex. This is not to like shame sex or anything. The only reason is so you suppress the dopamine hit that comes with it that will then cloud your judgment. When you have dopamine, it's clouding your judgment. There's no way that, if you know that you're this type of person, that you going and having sex with somebody that you feel fireworks for that has all these red flags is gonna, help you say no to that person. Like, you've got to be aware of that. So, anyways, I just always throw that out there for anybody who's listening.
Yeah, no, I mean, sex always clouds everything, right? I mean,
Totally. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if it's good, then you're like really cloudy. You're like, "Oh no, I can't see a
Yeah.
goddamn thing." Um, how often are you seeing that with like your clients, or even even in like people that are around you? That there's people have sex right away, and they're like, "Oh shit, now I'm in this weird
Right.
situation," right?
Right. Well, here's the thing is that I would say a lot of my clients are like that and they might not even realize they are. Okay. For
Sure.
that, like, sex is such a personal relationship with yourself, right? It's the act of somebody else. It's an act of intimacy, right, with someone else. But it's really starts with the act of intimacy with yourself and getting to know yourself, of what your boundaries are, what are your limits, upholding boundaries, all of that stuff. And so what I find a lot of times, if my clients don't have any boundaries, then, and I'm not talking just boundaries of in relationships, like they always say, oh, I feel too guilty, I'm a people pleaser, those types of boundaries. But I'm also talking about boundaries when it comes to sex that they're not even aware of. So they might feel like, oh, well, it's just easier to get it over with, or, I would just like to, I need to know if we have a sexual compatibility because I'm so anxious that we're not going to. I don't want to waste my time, right? Let's just have sex and get it over with. So it a lot of times it's coming from an anxious place, right? Motive. That's always what I tell my clients. Like, what are your motives? If your motive is to have sex, not just to connect on a deeper level, like, check in with what your motives are. So I do. I see it. I see it a lot with clients. And if you know you have a past of toxic relationships, or you have a past of not listening to red flags in relationships or even dating, then that's really where it needs to come into play. If you're an avoidant attachment, and that's somebody who's always putting a buffer between intimacy. So these are people who like to play the game, one foot in, one foot out. Hey, I like sleeping with you and I like going on dates, but let's just keep it this way. Let's not define the relationship, right? Or your
Mhm.
partner who can't tell you they love you, or somebody who cheats on you and sleeping with other people while sleeping with you, right? Okay, those are avoidant attachments. If anything, when it comes to sex and intimacy, my thing is that you have to learn to connect with yourself so then you can connect with other people, because what you're doing is you're disconnected during sex. So you go and have sex with a bunch of people emotionless. It's because you're not connected with yourself. So both people who feel anxious and anxious attachment, right, who like need to have sex to make sure it's good, to the avoidance side of having sex, both those people are kind of coming from similar spots. It's just, how do you navigate the space of intimacy?
Right, and they attract each other, from what I understand.
Yes, they do. It's a match made in heaven that will never
Right.
work out. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit, because you just hit on a hot button for me, right? Okay, avoidant attachment style people
Yes.
really get vilified a
I
lot.
know.
People love to just
Isn't that
trash.
messed up? I have some amazing clients, men and women, who are avoidant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And spoiler alert, I have been known to be
Uh-huh.
classified as an avoidant attachment. And, coming from that place, it's not, I mean, we're not all like, it's not like we're, completely psycho. We might be
Totally.
whatever, but
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that, um, we're so against all human contact and all of these things.
Yes.
Okay, so how do we? Because I've been on dating apps, right, and
Mhm.
that will come up, or someone will be like, I've seen your podcast, I saw the episode in question. Um, so you're an avoidant, right? And I'm like, yeah, I guess, and they're like, boop, like disconnect, like
Mm.
they'll
Yeah.
unmatch like that. Like they don't want to, especially in the more people who know what they want. As
Sure.
soon as they hear that, so
Mhm.
I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that? How do we kind of like move forward smarter about that?
Right. Can I ask you a personal question?
You can ask me all the
Okay,
personal
great.
questions.
Okay, so I'm just curious because you recognize that you have avoidant tendencies. Would you say that
Yes.
you are avoidant attachment, or do you have more of a secure attachment with avoidant tendencies?
So that's a tough question. I guess I don't even know how I would even know. It does
Okay.
seem a little bit of both, but
Okay.
I mean, there's no if, ands, or buts about it. Like I'm definitely avoidant one way or
Okay.
the other, right?
Yep.
So
Do you work toward trying to become secure? Like, have you done any type of work around it or anything like that?
no,
Okay.
but
Okay.
I'm willing to.
Okay.
You
So
know?
here's the thing. I always tell clients, for anybody who's anxious or avoidant, you want to get with somebody who's secure. So actually, the people who are unticking you, right, like, or whatever, disconnecting from you,
Right.
are actually the people you need to go after versus somebody who's anxious. So, so that's how you can become more secure. It's not a given though. Just because somebody's secure and
Sure.
it's like, I know I'm
Yeah.
secure, now I'm with him and he's avoidant and he's going to become secure, that person could actually become anxious because of it.
Right.
So, but a lot of avoidants get hate for it. And I'll tell you why I think that. Anybody who's secure will look at an avoidant and be like, like if you won't commit to a relationship, or actually, can we just use one of your examples? Give me an example of how you're avoidant right now.
So I just don't want someone in my shit all the time. Like I just want my space. Like,
Yep.
and there's one example, I guess, right? You want more?
Okay. Give me okay. So in what terms? Like, you don't want somebody coming
Like,
over, you don't want them to meet your friends in your space. Like, where does that?
Yeah. So for me, right? So in the last experience I had, someone's like, "Hey, I'm gonna come over on Tuesday," we'll say,
Okay.
and I'm like, "Cool. I don't know about that." And then and then they're like,
Okay.
"Oh, but then we agree. Okay, coming over Tuesday. We're gonna go to dinner.
Yep.
We're gonna hang out. We're gonna have a bunch of sex. You're gonna stay the night." And I'm like, I'm already freaking out a little bit, right? Because someone's in my
Yes.
bed, in my shit, whatever.
Yes.
But then Tuesday turns into, well, I'm having so much fun with you. What if I just stayed till Thursday? And I'm like, like whatever.
Cut it off. Just forget it.
Yeah.
Be done with it.
Get out. Right.
Get out. I'm done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So here's the thing is that a lot of times when you're in that space, right? Like the avoidant is needing their alone time. The anxious is needing the time with the avoidant, right? Like if you're anxious, you're worried the person's going to cheat. They're not going to want you, right? Which is all the things the avoidant brings out of you when you're anxious. And so the reason I think that they get like a bad rep is because you are pushing away somebody whose needs have to be met around feeling wanted, feeling needed. And when they're not, what does that bring on? Abandonment. And what does that bring on? Anger. And what's under anger? Fear. And so that person now is saying, well, fuck them. They didn't do X, Y, and Z, which look, there's a time and place for a fuck them. Okay. But I think that somebody who's secure doesn't really give a shit about the avoidant saying, hey, I don't want to talk to you anymore. Cause they'd be like, well, okay, I want somebody who's committed, on to the next. And so I think that reputation is actually what is coming from an anxious person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I just, to me, immediately, and sometimes this will happen, but it'll be like, hey, if we said that you were going to leave on Wednesday,
Yep.
this is just an example.
Yeah.
You're going to stay over. I'm going to give you 100% of what, while you're here, I'm going to give you 100% because I agreed to that. All good. Okay. So whatever. And I'm aware enough to do that. It's when the contract goes into extension talks that I have a problem. I start to flip out because I feel like this person's like weaving their fucking tentacles into my stuff. And before, and in my experience, if you don't sort of set those boundaries, right?
Yep. Boundaries. Perfect.
You will get totally robbed of your life. And then you're not answering phone calls from your friends. You're maybe like letting the fucking creative projects lapse. And I don't want to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's that side of it.
You want your independence of if I can't, none of this can be threatened.
Right.
Like hanging out with my friends, my creative projects.
Sure.
If I don't pay all the attention, like I want my independence.
Yeah. And the thing is if that person would just, and maybe they can't because that's just what they're going through, who they are and how they identify in terms of attachment styles. But if that person would just be like, hey, I respect that. I'm out of here at 1 o'clock.
Yes.
I'll see you. And I'd be instantly more attracted to that person, but it never, ever happens. It's always the I don't want to leave you thing. And
it's because they're anxious.
Yeah. And I've had so many experiences that go exactly that way. And it's like, great, here we are. Now I'm going to have to like become kind of an ass a little bit to like be more stern about, can you please leave? Like, cause it never sounds good. Right.
Right.
And so I get it. I get why people vilify, the avoidant like myself.
It's not personal. That's what I always tell my clients. You just did a beautiful explanation of it's really your own shit. Like that's really where it's coming from. And I mean, we don't have all the time in the day and you didn't ask for a coaching session, but I can already hear of certain blocks and things like that where you're putting a buffer between intimacy. So there's that aspect as well. And that's what avoidants do is you put the block, the buffer, whatever, the wall between you and intimacy. And that person just happens to be on the receiving end of intimacy.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing is, I mean, give me all the coaching sessions you want to while you're here. I'm not against
you're
it.
Like, please.
It's just one of those things where, for whatever reason, and I could say, oh, if they were just a little bit more secure, then we'd be off and running. But that's not fair because I'm asking them to come over to my, and that's whatever. And there is those blocks, and I totally understand that and respect that. It's very, and then there's a whole other thing where it's like, I want to move slow because I've got other stuff to do, right? I have stuff that's important to me. And in my experience, people always sort of try to monopolize your time, and people move really fast. And to me, I'm not about that life. Let's pump the
Right.
fucking brakes. I'm going to get out of the car. Have a nice day.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, that's the other thing too. I always tell clients is like, you want to take your time to get to know someone. So if you're anxious, you're trying to hurry it. And if you're avoidant, you're just trying to let it linger. And so this is why, I was asking if you've done any work around it, because if you, I assume, I'm going to ask the question. I feel like I'm going to know what you're going to
Sure.
say. I assume
Yeah.
you want connection with another human being. Like you do want to have like an intimate connection with another human being.
Ew. No, of course I do. Yeah. Of
Right.
course I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the thing that a lot of people don't get about avoidance is they feel like, oh, this person is just pushing me off. They don't want anyone. No, like you genuinely do want the connection. It's just that, like I said, you have this wall up between you and intimacy. It's like you're on one side, intimacy's on the other, and then you just throw things in the middle so you never have to touch it.
Yeah. And I think, I'm also on top of that. And maybe this is more of the same, right? But this is the other stuff is like, I'm not interested in having a relationship where one person is in control of the other one. I'm not interested in having arguments in the fucking tavern about, who texted who or whatever. Let me see your phone. That's not like,
Yeah.
if anything, if I were
Yeah.
to give up any time, meaningful time,
Mm-hmm.
outside of what I'm currently okay with, it
Yep.
would be with someone that I want to develop like a partnership with, where we're not jealous
Yeah.
all the time. And I don't know, maybe who knows? I mean, this
Yeah.
podcast for me has been um more of an evolution personally than I ever thought it would be. There's questions about, oh, maybe I belong in an open relationship. Maybe I belong in a fucking padded cell. I don't whatever the case may be, right? Um,
Yeah.
I'm not interested in having any of those things with anyone who is of the mind to be like, I want to control him. Because in
Mm.
my experience in my previous relationships, I'm doing this a lot for people that are watching on YouTube, but I find that people will gravitate towards me because I'm outgoing, or I'm this, or I'm that, or he's a public person and doing all these things, and it's so attractive and fun. And then the second we're in a relationship, it's like, stop doing that. Like, whoa,
Right.
wait a minute.
Right.
Who are you?
Which sounds like you're attracting somebody who's anxious. Like every
Right.
example you just gave, the jealousy, unless you really are doing things like you are talking to other women while in a monogamous relationship, then that makes sense of having somebody having that response. And then it would be your
Sure.
responsibility to repair. But if it's more of just like they feel jealous and they're doing the whole anxious attachment stuff, accusing you of cheating and you're not, like that, then yeah, that
Right.
describes it.
Well, you're amazing, and I appreciate you listening to all that, giving your thoughtful advice, because I think, a lot of women have reached out to me around the show and been like, hey, I'm an avoidant too. And
Mhm.
hearing you talk about it and being open about it, it's actually made me feel better. And so like, fuck yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. No shame
thank
to
you
the game.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I'm wondering in closing, if you could, with all of your amazing experience and knowledge and wisdom, if you could maybe give some advice to people who maybe were sidelined in the pandemic, maybe are kind of lost, feeling like a little anxious just in general about the world and dating and finding, not even partnership, but just having a better life, right? Making better connections. What advice could you give them going
Okay,
forward?
this is going to get deep. Your
Yes.
thoughts are actually what's dictating your future forward. And if you do not plant yourself in today and start making little micro changes, then you will not be where you want to be later. So stop focusing so much on the end goal of I want a relationship. How do I get a relationship? And start focusing on like, what's the first step I can take today to get out of this place that could land me into a relationship? So your thoughts are powerful, self-fulfilling prophecy all the time. I see this with my clients. I don't think I'm good enough. I am not lovable. I'm not worthy. I'm just, I go after people who are red flags, et cetera, all that kind of stuff, right? And at the end of the day, if you think that, you cannot compartmentalize your thoughts and feelings, you bring that with you on your date. So if you can take a step back, clear, connect with yourself, get all that shit out of the way, then you can start taking those micro steps to actually getting that relationship you want. And it really doesn't take that long.
Wow. That's amazing. Carla Romo, thank you so much for being on the show with me. Thanks for putting up with all my bullshit. Where can people find you? Where can people find the book? Where can people hire you, give you all their money?
Yeah. So you can go to carlaromo.com. The book's there. The podcast is there. If you want to work with me one-on-one or you're interested, definitely you can contact me there as well. And then TikTok, Instagram is I am Carla Romo, and it's Carla with a C.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I'm definitely going to talk you into coming back. So
I'd love to.
Awesome. We'll talk soon. Huge thank you to my guest this week, Carla Romo. Wasn't that fucking awesome? Isn't she great? I mean, come on, right? Go show her some love on Instagram, on TikTok. Go get her book. And yeah, if you guys are loving Sex Party, if you want to show that love, if you want to help the show grow, listen, there's a couple things that you can do. You don't have to do this fucking bullshit, but if you do, it will help the show grow considerably, and I appreciate it. You can, if you're listening on Apple and Spotify or Stitcher or Google or wherever, you can subscribe to the show. You can leave a rating. You can leave a review if you want to. That would be awesome. If you're watching on YouTube, hello. We okay? Okay. You can like the video on YouTube. You can subscribe to the channel on YouTube. You can leave a comment on YouTube. You can always find me on Instagram. You can always DM me and ask me silly shit or serious shit. It's up to you. And I can't wait to see you guys back here next week.
Thanks for listening. The party continues next week. Click subscribe and let's make this a regular thing. Follow the show on Instagram and Twitter at SexPartyFM. Follow Dustin at Dustin Rybka.